Sunday morning came soft and slow, just the way I liked it. The sky outside my kitchen window was the kind of blue you'd expect in a painting, not real life. I had just finished watering the marigolds and the basil, then rinsed the clay from my hands. My small garden patch tucked into the corner of the yard had become the only space that still felt mine. I poured myself a glass of iced tea, set the radio to an oldies station, and settled into the creaky chair on the back porch. The house was quiet in that in-between way where silence isn't peace, just the absence of noise. I took a sip of tea and closed my eyes for a moment, trying to remember the last time this place had felt like a home instead of a hallway I passed through. That was when the front door flung open. I didn't see him, just heard the thud of sneakers and the heavy sigh that always came before a demand. My son Julian didn't say good morning. He didn't look at me. "Hey, Mom," he said already, halfway past the living room. "Think you can head out for a while today? Maybe go get coffee with someone. I'm doing a BBQ here with some friends." It took me a second to understand what he meant. I blinked at him, still holding my glass. He wasn't asking, he was informing me like I was the housekeeper who'd been scheduled to take a break. No eye contact, no tone of consideration. He disappeared into his room before I could form a reply, trailing the smell of yesterday's cologne and the sound of his phone playing loud music through cheap speakers. I sat there, the condensation from my glass dripping onto my knee, and listened as the back door slammed shut. The music from the radio turned into a low hum I couldn't focus on. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower buzzed. I stayed on the porch for a while, staring at the empty space where Julian had stood. The tea in my glass warmed until it tasted like nothing. Eventually, I went back inside, moving slow as if the floorboards beneath me were unfamiliar. The living room was in its usual disarray. The rug I vacuumed 2 days ago was bunched up against the sofa leg. The remote was face down on the floor, batteries knocked loose. A half-eaten sandwich crust had dried onto a paper plate on the coffee table. On the hallway floor, one of his flip-flops sat sideways, like it had been kicked off mid-step. And on my kitchen chair, my chair was the same damp towel he'd been leaving there all week. I picked it up without thinking like I always did. There was a time I would have called out to him, asked him to clean up after himself, maybe even started a fight about respect and boundaries. But I'd learned to hold my tongue, not out of peace, but out of exhaustion. Every conversation turned into deflection. Every reminder became a guilt trip. I was either too sensitive, too old-fashioned, or just doing too much. So I stopped mentioning the towel. I stopped pointing out the toothpaste crusted in the bathroom sink. I stopped asking about the dishes in his room. I cleaned around him like he was furniture nailed to the floor. It was easier that way. Easier to keep the quiet. Easier to pretend I still had control over something. I placed the folded towel on the back of the laundry chair and noticed a receipt on the counter headphones. $179.99. Meanwhile, last week, I'd skipped buying myself a new pair of house slippers because the ones I had still technically held together. I walked to the hallway closet and reached for the old blue folder. The blue folder still smelled faintly of old paper and plastic. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were utility bills, repair invoices, and notes I'd scribbled on sticky pads to keep track of payments, gas, water, garbage, all in my name. I flipped to the oldest ones from the spring Julian moved back in. He'd shown up with 2 duffel bags and a pale face fresh from a breakup that had left him shaken. His voice cracked when he asked if he could stay for a little while, just until he found a new apartment, just until things settled, just until he got back on his feet. I opened the door like any mother would. I made chicken soup that night, the kind he liked as a boy, with soft carrots and broken spaghetti noodles. I even cleaned out the guest room and laid a clean towel at the foot of the bed. That was 7 years ago. At first he helped here and there. Took out the trash, picked up groceries. said thank you more often, but then the helping stopped. First it was the grocery runs, then the job search, then it was the bills. He said he was between gigs, that things were tight, that he'd catch up next month. I didn't push. I told myself it was temporary. I believed that if I just held steady, he'd come around. I watched him buy new sneakers, a gaming console, a Bluetooth speaker shirts that cost more than my monthly prescriptions. But the light bill, the water, the internet, that was always mine, every time. 7 years. In all that time, Julian hadn't paid a single bill. Not one. I never told anyone. Not my sister. Not even Dalma. It felt too shameful, like admitting failure in the one job I was supposed to be good at. I put the folder down and walked to the kitchen window. The sun was beginning to lean west, slanting over the yard where I used to sit with his father in the quiet before dinner. That winter, I remember sitting alone at the table with a roast chicken, meant for two. Julian didn't come home until almost 2 a.m., reeking of beer, mumbling that he forgot it was Christmas Eve. I scraped the rice and green beans into the trash that night without saying a word. The next morning, I made coffee, like nothing had happened. After a while, I stopped decorating altogether. The wreath stayed in its box. The string lights remained tangled in the closet. Friends stopped calling to invite me anywhere because I always said no, didn't want to bother Julian, didn't want to leave the house empty. The radio in the kitchen went quiet. I used to hum along while folding laundry, but now, even that felt like noise I didn't deserve. There was a bracelet, once gold, simple, a gift from my husband for my 40th birthday. It wasn't fancy, but he'd saved for it for months. I sold it in 3 installments to a neighbor when the refrigerator broke. Julian had tried to fix it himself and made it worse. He never asked how I paid for the replacement. I never told him. It would have been humiliating to say I gave up the last thing his father ever gave me to keep this house running. Everything that used to be mine, my time, my things, my quiet had been repurposed for someone who didn't even notice. I used to read before bed. I used to crochet blankets and listen to old cumbia records. Now I barely remembered where I put my yarn, and my books stayed on the shelf with bookmarks stuck at page 12. That evening, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. Her eyes looked tired, but not from age, tired from never being asked how she was doing. I went to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Then I opened the drawer in my nightstand and pulled out a pen. I sat with the pen in my hand for what felt like an hour before I finally moved. The drawer was already open, the documents neatly folded inside, deed to the house utility statements, everything I'd carried alone for years. I pulled them out one by one and placed them into a transparent folder, the same kind Julian had used in high school for his math homework. Somehow that felt fitting. I walked to the kitchen and took a clean sheet of notepad paper. I wrote only one sentence: "Enjoy your party. Starting tomorrow, the bills are yours. The owner's on leave. No name, no explanation. Just that." I placed the note on top of the folder and left both in the center of the dining table. Upstairs, I changed into a loose pair of black slacks and a light cotton blouse. I tucked my ID, a bottle of blood pressure pills, and my phone charger into my purse. From the bathroom cabinet, I took only what I needed for a few nights, nothing more. No clothes, no books, not even my hairbrush. I grabbed my spare house keys and left the full ring on the counter. The sun was still out when I stepped onto the porch. I could hear Julian's music blaring from the backyard, the deep thump of bass bouncing off the fence. Laughter floated in from the patio. He didn't see me go. I walked 3 blocks before I called Dalma. She didn't ask questions. "Of course," she said. "Your room's still got the quilt you left here last winter." I rode the bus across town, sitting in the very back, staring at nothing. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, just the unfamiliarity. of doing something for myself. When Dalma opened the door, her face softened. "Took you long enough," she whispered, pulling me into her kitchen like I belonged there. I sat down, finally, still finally quiet, and let the warmth of her coffee pot replace the noise I'd just left behind. Dalma didn't fuss. She handed me a chipped mug filled with strong black coffee and set a plate of toast in front of me like we did this every Saturday. Her house was smaller than mine, older in some places, but it smelled like safety, like fried onions and lavender soap and stories that didn't need repeating. We sat by the kitchen window where the light came in, slanted and warm. She didn't push me to talk. She just let the silence stretch out like a soft rug beneath our feet. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the bitterness settle into my chest. For the first time in a long while, no one asked me where the clean towels were. No one complained about dinner. No one slammed doors or blasted music through the walls. That night, she gave me a set of sheets and a pillow, and I curled up on the guest bed without ceremony. The mattress creaked, and the street lamp outside buzzed faintly through the blinds. But I slept. I didn't lie awake, wondering if he was coming home, or if I'd find the sink full again in the morning. I didn't stare at the ceiling trying to remember who I was before motherhood became maintenance. I slept fully, deeply. In the morning, I stood barefoot in her kitchen and buttered toast for the both of us. Dalma smiled without a word. She knew what it meant. She knew something had shifted, and that I was no longer just tired. I was choosing something different. I folded the extra napkins and wrote a small list on the back of one check document's call, "Maya, make a plan." It was the first list in years that didn't have someone else's needs at the top. Maya answered on the first ring. "Tia, are you okay?" she asked, voice tight. I told her I was safe staying with Dalma and that I needed her help, not with emotion, but with paperwork. She listened without interrupting. When I finished explaining, she paused for a breath and said, "You've carried more than your share. Let's handle this properly." By noon, she'd emailed me a draft notice of termination, clear, respectful, and firm. 60 days. No yelling, no threats, just a clean boundary in black and white. "It's not eviction," she said. "It's the end of a favor." I read it 3 times before printing a copy at the library and signing it in pen. I kept the envelope sealed in my bag for 2 more days, waiting for the right time to return. Dalma offered to come with me, and I accepted. We arrived in the early afternoon. The front steps were littered with fallen leaves, and the screen door creaked as I opened it. I used my key not with hesitation, but with ownership. The living room was stale with the scent of leftover smoke and takeout containers. The TV was off, but the game controller lay tangled on the floor. He wasn't home. Upstairs, the bedroom I had once retreated to was still made the way I left it. Pillows aligned curtains. Open my blanket, neatly folded. I gathered what I'd left behind, a second pair of glasses, my robe, a bottle of arthritis cream from the bathroom. Then I walked to the kitchen, placed the envelope in the center of the table, and pressed it flat with my palm. Dalma stood by the door, her arms crossed, watching me. I looked around the room one last time and noticed the faint ring of dust on the counter where the radio used to sit. I didn't feel sad, just clean, like I'd rinsed something out that had been stuck inside me too long. We left without locking the front door. The house still belonged to me, but the weight of it didn't. I stepped back into the sun and breathed out slowly, like someone who'd finally remembered what her own name sounded like. 3 days after leaving the envelope on the table, there was a knock at Dalma's side gate just before sunset. When I opened it, no one was there, just a grocery bag sitting on the concrete with a folded napkin on top. Inside were 3 plastic containers, rice beans, and a small portion of roast chicken. The handwriting on the napkin was rushed and uneven. "Made your favorite. Hope you're okay." I stood with the bag in my hand, not sure whether to laugh or cry. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was recognition. This wasn't care. It was an apology without the discomfort of an actual conversation. A gesture meant to rewind the story without rewriting any of it. I set the bag on the counter and opened one container. The food was still warm. He'd made the effort. But effort without change isn't love. It's delay. I watched the steam rise and fade into the air before walking to the sink. I tipped the contents out one by one, then rinsed the containers and left them in the recycling bin by the door. That night, I boiled a small pot of water and made myself lentils with turmeric and garlic. I sliced a ripe avocado and added a sprinkle of salt. I sat at Dalma's kitchen table alone, but not lonely, and ate slowly, chewing until the bitterness in my chest softened. I had cooked for myself. I had chosen what I wanted. I had eaten without waiting on anyone's permission or appetite. Later, I took out my notebook and wrote in the margin of a blank page, "Some things look like peace but smell like guilt." I underlined it twice, then closed the book. Maya called on a Friday afternoon. "He dropped the key off this morning," she said. Didn't say much, just that he was done. I waited until Sunday to go back. The morning was gray and windless, and the neighborhood felt quieter than I remembered. I brought a new key in my pocket, one the locksmith had made last month, when Maya updated the lock. I didn't rush. The front door opened with a click that echoed. The smell hit me first, stale grease, old socks, something sour that had settled into the air like a memory. I walked through, slowly letting the silence seep into me. The living room looked abandoned, but not intentionally. Wires hung from where the TV had been. A blanket was crumpled on the floor. The coffee table was missing, and the rug was stained dark in one corner. I went room by room. His bedroom was empty, except for a scuffed dresser and a mattress leaning against the wall. The closet door hung open, revealing nothing but dust bunnies and a cracked coat hanger. In the kitchen, the fridge was unplugged and left ajar, its light long dead. The only sound was the soft creak of my shoes against the linoleum. Upstairs, I stepped into what had once been my bedroom. Everything I cared about was already gone. I opened the window to let the air in and stood there breathing slowly. Across the room, I noticed the faint chalk lines still visible on the doorframe. Julian used to mark his height there every year on his birthday. I ran my fingers over one dated from when he was 8. The line barely reached my waist. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just stood still until the air felt bearable. Then I walked through each room one last time, pausing in the hallway before heading back down. The walls didn't speak. The floor didn't creak in any familiar rhythm. It was just a structure now, 4 walls, and a roof that no longer needed me. The room I rented was small, just enough for a bed, a chair, and a little shelf that held my books and photos. It had a window that let in soft morning light, and in the afternoons a breeze passed through that smelled faintly of pine from the park across the street. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I started walking each morning, nothing urgent, just slow circles around the park trail. I nodded to the same few strangers, an older man with a cane, a mother pushing twins in a stroller. I wasn't part of their stories, but I was present in them. That felt like enough. On Wednesdays, I joined a reading group at the community center. 10 women sat in folding chairs, sharing excerpts from books and parts of themselves in between. One afternoon, someone read a passage about invisible labor and the courage it takes to say no more. There was a long pause after she finished. No one cried, but no one needed to. We all knew the weight of what hadn't been said. That Saturday, while I was watering a small basil plant I kept by the window, there was a knock at the door. A young man stood there, awkward eyes down. I recognized him, one of Julian's friends, though I never learned his name. I just wanted to say, he cleared his throat, I was there the day of the barbecue. We didn't know. We didn't know what he'd asked of you. We thought it was his place. I guess I just wanted to say you did the right thing." He didn't wait for a reply, just nodded and left. I stood at the door, the watering can, still in my hand, feeling something settle in me. Not pride, not vindication, just clarity. They asked me to speak at the community center the following month. The theme was boundaries and belonging. I hesitated at first, but then wrote a short piece and titled it, "Love is Not Measured by Sacrifice." It wasn't a story full of drama or fire. It was quieter than that, like stepping into a room and finally closing the door behind you. I spoke about the years I spent believing love meant giving until there was nothing left. About how I mistook endurance for affection and silence for harmony. I told them how I'd confused holding on with holding up. When I finished, a woman in the back raised her hand. Her voice trembled as she asked, "What if he comes back? What if he wants to make it right?" I didn't have to think. I said, "Then he'll have to return to himself first. I'm not where he left me anymore." There was a stillness in the room after that. Not heavy, just full. That week, I signed my name on a new lease for a space that fit only what I needed. I updated my library card, the old one still showing my married name. This time, I printed it clearly, Irene Salgado. No one else's name attached. No one else's permission asked. Later that evening, I opened my notebook and wrote a single sentence across the top of a blank page. Freedom didn't arrive with noise. It arrived with my own handwriting. Then I folded the page carefully and placed it between my books, no longer hidden, just waiting.